Welcome to Conversation 2019.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Hope you all had a nice lunch. Maybe you guys can start just by telling us a little bit on who you are. Maybe, Amina, you want to start?
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Amina Esselimani. I'm a UX designer, and I'm the founder of SpeakUX, which is a UX and conversation design agency based in Paris.
Maaike?
So I'm Maaike Coppens. I'm a conversation experience designer like Amina. And that's it. I make sure that people design intuitive conversations.
Vincent?
And my name is Vincent Perrin. I'm in charge of the IBM AI offering tools, and I'm working with Gabriel to integrate our technology with high-advice technology.
Thank you all, guys, for being here. Maybe we should start by, on this particular subject, by defining a little bit what you guys see in the title. Maybe, Maaike, you can help us understand a little bit what we mean when we say inclusion.
Yes, I can, but I'm also going to ask the public to help me out a bit. So if you can all raise your hands, everyone who has interacted with a chatbot over the last 2 weeks, please. So go ahead. So keep your hands raised now, and the people that have interacted with a chatbot that had a female icon can keep their hands up, the other ones can lower their hands. Okay, now I'd like to keep the people who had a conversation with a female icon chatbot. Keep your hands raised. And so you can lower your hands if that particular female icon brand was an icon with a person of color. So I don't see many hands that are still raised. So inclusion and accessibility are often confounded because inclusion is about designing a digital product, and in our case, a conversation, that is usable by as many people as possible. Whereas accessibility is also about that, but is more focused on people with disabilities, impairments, etc. Whereas inclusion is also about gender identification, which is not just binary, male, female, but a lot of people identify as a lot of different things. For example, a few years ago, Facebook, well, there was Ricardo earlier this morning, they had a form where you had to say, I'm male or female, which they now have changed since then into male, female, or custom. And it lets people identify as who they want to be. And not only that, it lets them also choose the fact whether they want to share that information or not. And so inclusion is about everything. It is about gender, it is about race, it is also about context, about stress situations. And so in conversation design, we have this thing called a happy path. And everyone is very enthusiastic about the fact, okay, let's design a happy path. Only the problem is, real life is not a happy path most of the time.
Vincent, do you agree with this?
I will try to continue the definition introduced by Michael. I think it's taking into account the fact that the people that you will have in front of the tools, I mean in my case, all AI tools, not just conversational tools, are various, are different. So it means that when you think about designing this kind of interactions, it's the ability to adapt your speech, adapt the tone of your system to take into account that variability, that diversity, And as you mentioned, gender is one kind of diversity, ethnicity is one kind of diversity, but you have plenty of diversity, so it has to be taken into account. And in order to be able to have, as mentioned by Ken this morning, an exceptional customer experience, and customer can be different. So all of the customer has to be taken at the same level, even if they are color people, or it's a gender or custom, as you mentioned. So adapting your speech to be diverse.
Now that we kind of defined inclusion, maybe Amina, you can help us understand why do you think it's important to take this into account when we talk about the conversation?
Yes, it's important because we all worry about adoption. Why our bot is not adopted, is not used. So as designer and as a team leader or project leader, we need to make sure that we will have those adoption and design the experience to be adopted. Adopted means we have to reach a wide range of users, a maximum of users, especially if we are designing projects and services for a wide range of users. And also, we have to make sure that those users are returning users. They don't use it just one time and then buy. We have to keep them in the service and keep them returning to do the experience with the chatbot. So for that, I will share with you, I would like to share with you 3 best practices that we use when we approach a conversational experience. First of all, in terms of interface, we try to be neutral, not to take too many risks, to take in consideration the mood of the user. Maybe he's not happy in this situation, or maybe he's disappointed. So we try not to take too much risk in giving too much emotion to the bot. And when we say interface, it means how we choose the tone of voice, how we choose the words. So in terms of interface, we're trying to be neutral, but to take in consideration also many kind of users. We can have, many other generations which usually don't use the bot. They can use the bot now, so we have to include them in the way we design in the process and the way we design. And that means that we have to use the existing persona system, user persona. So today when we start working on the project, we took this persona because that's the knowledge and that's the user that we are going to create the service for. But with those new services, conversational services, we need to update those persona and check if they use messaging application, and how is their digital behavior on those kind of channels. And also, as we are reaching maybe older generation, we have maybe to create new persona and to make sure that when we design the conversation, we include them in the experience. The second best practice recommendation, I would say, it's to include the user in the early stage of the process, the design process. That means when we select a use case, instead of creating the flows and the happy path and etc., maybe we have first to verify this use case and see if the value that we think we are giving to the user is well perceived. Maybe sometimes the user will not see the value, and even if it's visible in the experience, it's not important enough to move channel and to adopt this new channel. So one of the recommendations is to do user testing, to test the use case, and to see how the value is perceived by the user. And then one last maybe recommendation is when we talk about conversational experience, it means custom experience. It means a personalized experience. So we need to take in consideration a lot of context. Context means, for example, the first time I'm using the service. I'm using this service, I'm in a hurry. Or I'm using a service, I'm not alone. I'm using a service, but I already interact with another channel. So we have to identify all those contexts and design the experience taking in consideration those contexts. For example, I had the luck to work with a medical startup, which is called DeepOR, and we have designed an artificial intelligence to help the medical team in the operation room. And I have designed the voice experience, and we have done some user testing in hospital, and we have scheduled all the tests. And then we had one use case where we couldn't test the service because the anesthesia was done under hypnosis. So we couldn't chat, or we couldn't use our voice, we couldn't interact with the artificial intelligence, and we couldn't give the information to this artificial intelligence for the service. So if we didn't do those tests in early stage, we will not discover this context, and maybe we will redo all the experience when we come at the end of the project. So if we can test as soon as possible, that's the recommendation I will recommend. And this is also the way that we design the experience. For example, maybe one example which has been said at SNCF this morning from Elodie. I had the luck actually to work with SNCF and design the first voice experience. And when I have tested the voice experience during the conception, during the design, I have noticed that people who are asking to book a train in the evening, they are more interested in the time of arrival than the departure time. So that means in this specific context, I would have to design a different response and maybe a different path, because in this context and at this moment of the journey, the user will need those two information and not maybe all the information we have planned before. So user testing is a way to include in early stages users in the experience, and actually they help us to design the experience. We cannot have all the ideas in the first time. It's by testing the use cases, the path, the interface on site, on the ground with them, that we can see how we can design the sentences, the experience, and which value we are adding to the experience.
Maaike, do you also see this inclusion to be a major subject in your projects? And do you see what Amina has talked about, the fact that we need to take in consideration all these profiles, and the fact that profiles can change depending on time, or depending on various things that can happen during a person's life or during a person's day?
Well, actually, yes, I do, because a lot of the design process today is based on user testing, as Amina said, which is really important and has not been emphasized enough. And I would say it's even more so with conversation, because if you think about it, even in a human-to-human conversation, you don't have the same conversation twice, even if it's with the same person. Even it's with another person, but the same subject. And so people's lives evolve all the time. And what I see a lot today in a lot of design processes is that we design based on personas. Those personas come from user testing, but also are a lot data-driven today, with all the verbatims in conversation that we get from client services, from previous bot experiments, etc. But the thing is, all those services have been designed for a particular personas. And the problem that is with that is that we already have a bias right there. Because those personas are our ideal customers, our customers based on our current customer client base, and all the other people, which is the exact opposite of inclusion, are excluded. And I find it really interesting what Ken Hughes said this morning, because he gave a lot of examples. For example, the person with the broken guitar, the person with the fish, and what we notice in those examples is that it's just one person. So one person that might not be, might not fall under one of the predicted personas. And they have made a huge difference in the image of the brand. And so it's funny, because a lot of brands I work with, and especially for bot platforms as well, talk about the Pareto principle. So the fact that you have a division between 80% and 20%. And the problem is when you design for the 80%, like the thing that is going to bring you the most value, you exclude 20% of people. And so if you only think about it in numbers as 80-20, it's like, it's not a lot, 80-20. But if you think about it in terms of billions of people interacting with messenger platforms today, if you scale the percentage to a real number, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of people that don't get the value they deserve, that can't interact with your conversation as they would like to, that don't get the same experience as everyone else, and that can't do everything which you set them up to do. So what I like to do when designing a conversation is two things, is create anti-personas. So if you have a persona, and I'm sure a lot of brands and marketing people out there have gotten persona sheets in front of them at some point in their careers, and you might notice that all the stock photos, just the ones as the ones Ken Hughes actually used, are smiling people. And everyone's happy and all goes well, and the conversation goes well from A to Z, no drop-off, and even if there is a drop-off, we have thought of this magnificent handover scenario that will blow them away. But in reality, people can be stressed, as Amina said before, or they can have just lost a lost one or a loved one, or they can be in a difficult situation, like Ricardo talked about, like Alcoholics Anonymous, for example, etc. So anti-personas help you get, as a designer, out and as a team as well, marketing team, design team, product team, to step out of your bias. Because we are all humans and we all grow up in certain situations, and because we think something is like that, we kind of assume that the same thing is true for everyone in the world. It's not our fault, it's how we're made, and it's a wonderful quality, but we have to be aware of it and step out of it to make sure that we design products and conversations for as many people as possible. That's what inclusion is all about. And another thing, like in the process, except for the anti-personas, is thinking not only about edge cases, that's to say conversations that happen outside of the happy path I talked about earlier, but also stress cases. And stress cases is more about emotion. And it's about what impact is this conversation going to have on my end user, on my end consumer. And I think nowadays we talk a lot about AI evolving and the fact that tomorrow bots and voice assistant might be able to interpret and understand human emotions. But another question to ask is, what happens on the other side? What is the human interpretation of the emotions? What is the emotional impact of the message I'm sending? And how can I best adopt the conversation to make sure that we're on the same page? Something that is true, as Amina said, during the day might not be true during the nighttime. Something that is true for a person that has been hearing very good for their entire lives might not be the same for a person that has a hearing impairment, for example. One example I could give was in a health situation as well, talking about a voice assistant. And as sometimes happens, the user didn't quite respond to what the voice assistant asked. And what was interesting to notice is that we have these prompts that say, "I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Can you please repeat that?" The problem is, for us people that hear very well during their entire lives, have never had a hearing impairment, never had an illness, that seems normal. It doesn't do anything to us, it's neutral. The problem is to someone with a hearing impairment, "I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you," suddenly can become somewhat offensive, especially if they've just been diagnosed, for example, with that particular impairment. So inclusion is really tricky because it's really about personalization. And personalization, I would say, is more than just giving a tone of voice to your bot. It's more than just giving your bot a personality. But because giving your bot a personality is great from a marketing point of view, but on the other hand, if you give it a personality, that means that you're excluding all the people that don't connect with that kind of personality.
Vincent, do you kind of have the same approach on inclusion at IBM, or are there other things that you are doing to take into account inclusion?
For sure, around the kind of conversation, the the notion of inclusions within that space is more and more critical for organizations, especially because organizations are social responsibility. And a conversational system, which could be led by a human, like I advise, or could be led by an AI solution, is interacting for you. It represents your brand. So it means that most of our organizations are, I would say, training their employee to understand and to have some empathy regarding the customer they can have in front of them, in order to take into account gender things, impairment, handicap, and it's crucial to take into account that things in any kind of AI development. And we are talking about conversation, but it's the same thing when you are doing computer visions or NLP things, so handling a large volume of documents. And more and more the market, I would say the tech market, is providing tools in order to help organization, because we have to be honest with you, it's not something easy to take into account. It takes time, so it means money, but it's really important because it is the way we want to create a society where we will live, and how the organization, in your case, your organization, will suit in that society. At Vivatech, a lot of organizations are push what we call the human in tech, so especially in my business, because we don't have enough diversity within our tech organization. It means that when we are designing AI-based solutions, we are not taking this value, it means the female value regarding this kind of aspect and this kind of comment. And it is not in the conversational space, but I'm pretty sure that you have seen a lot of bias in past AI tools deployed by multiple organizations all over the world, not taking into account, I would say, black color in picture, in face recognitions, or not taking into account the fact that this person has some specificity in the solution. It means that, as you mentioned regarding the 80-20% view, you have to think about what will be the feeling of the person using your technology. Because I think it's Jeff Bezos this morning or yesterday who published a thing regarding what is important is not the customer who is happy, but the customer who is not happy. And it's exactly what Ken mentioned this morning with the person, the singer who broke the guitar. A not happy customer won't be your worst enemy, especially at the age of social networking platform. He will be able to take a picture of the sentence that you share with him and share that information on social network platform. And it will be very tough to handle that situation. So my advice and to customer designing AI solution is to take into account that problem at the beginning of the project, and not saying that, okay, we will handle 80% and then we will see what we will do in the future. We know, and it was exactly the same thing for change management. At the end, we skip that part. So it has to be taken into account. For example, at IBM, we have a dedicated person related to ethics and diversity, to push diversity in all our solutions and all our projects, because otherwise it will be skipped.
And Amina, do you see a difference? Because we talk about inclusion, we focus on AI-based tool, but inclusion was a issue or a key subject before. It was the case for humans as well. So what's the difference when we talk about inclusions between AI-based tools and humans, for example?
Well, for example, the example of customer care subject, we are, as designer, we are focusing on how to automate processes. We learn about processes, we understand what the agent processes and how he's feeling and what he doesn't want to do and what he likes to do, and see how we can automate things that he doesn't like to do. Well, we are focusing about how to automate the process, but actually there is a part of the job of the agent, which is the empathy. So how he developed the empathy with the customer and how he adapt the process to the customer, and we are not able to automate that. So what we are doing today is to create a bot persona, and we are creating empathy. We are creating an empathy for the persona, and this will bring some guidelines how to use the tone of voice during the experience and what kind of words, etc. And we can also identify some context. For example, if the customer is not happy, then we are going to send him this answer. So today, automatizing the empathy is really difficult. So that's why there is still big difference between artificial intelligence and human.
I agree with Amina on that, and I would also add to what she said, just said, by saying that inclusion is already a societal problem and is still a societal problem, even though we'd like to think it is not. And we must not forget that artificial intelligence isn't magic. It's not just some consciousness that was born out of nowhere. It has been created by humans. Every single conversation that we have using chatbots, using voice assistants, at some point have been developed by people, the copy has been written by people, and all of these people have cognitive biases which we inherit when we converse with those assistants. And one way of going about having more empathy as a product team is immersion, and I think it is really, really important. I recently designed with the team a bot for a big DIY brand, which in French is bricolage, by the way. And what we did is we actually didn't talk with sales agents or had interviews, but there was a session of immersion where we lived it during several days, and that helps a lot with empathy. And what also helps with conversations, because it is conversations, is to role play every single bit of copy that you write. It's a very tedious process, and as Vincent said, it's not a thing that you do in 2 seconds. It's a thing you do with organizational change as well. Because if you have a team with a lot of the same people from the same gender, from the same ethnicity, with no problem whatsoever, the problem starts there. So I had a really interesting conversation actually during the lunchtime with a company that does customer care for the hearing impaired, for deaf people, and where all the agents are people with hearing impairment. So the empathy is totally optimized in that kind of case, which I found admirable. That's hence why I mentioned them. But so it's an organizational change. It's about getting the right team in place from the beginning of the product, from the beginning of even the ideation sessions you do, because the ideas that are going to create the product are going to contribute to the product. That's where it all starts. So diversity has to start there. And I think diversity has to start with humans, and then artificial intelligence, which is artificial, will take it up from there. So we can try and include as much as possible in our digital products, but in our day-to-day lives we don't, and if we don't make any structural, organizational changes, well, we'll not get anywhere.
So if I follow what Maaike said, we actually need more human for the AI to take into account inclusion. Do you agree with this?
I fully agree with this, and she also mentioned something very important. We have bias as human. The problem with the technology behind AI solution is that it's bias on steroid. So based on the data that you will use to train, because it's clearly a training and data come from human, that data can bring some bias. So when my team designed some conversational platform, at the beginning, a couple of years ago, we said that, okay, we will talk with the expert, and they will collect sentences that we'll use to train the system to recognize the customer request or the employee request. The problem with that is it's pretty simple. We introduce bias because the expert will structure sentence as he would like to hear, how we would like to be questions, which is not the case. And that's why you mentioned user testing, because you have to use real end user testing. You will have to clearly understand how your user will express their demand. I remember it was 2 years ago now, Stephen Richard, just before the launch of Orange Bank, mentioned that, and sorry, the sentence will be in French because it's not easy to translate. Now the Orange Bank bot is able to understand the sentence "envoie 20 balles à mémé." So he made a short ads on internet about that. It's really easy to do. In fact, when you train a bot, but when the team did that, they take into account the diversity of the future customer, knowing the fact that they will express their wish by this kind of sentence. And potentially for another customer, it will be a totally different sentence. So this notion is clearly important.
Actually, what that makes me think of something, the fact French, English, and everything. What we haven't touched upon about diversity is different languages. We live today in a global society. There's a lot of English speaking people here today, a lot of French speaking people, perhaps also Spanish speaking people, German speaking people, and today voice assistants are one language only. They have a lot of difficulty switching from one to another, etc. And when we design voice experiences, there's a whole lot of work to be done around internationalization, and not only about country per country, language per language, but dialects, for example. I'm quite sure that someone from Marseille has not the same way of asking for something to a voice assistant as does someone from Paris, from Amiens, from Lille, from Perpignan.
No, that point leads to the point that unfortunately the human language is imperfect and it's evolving. So it means that you have to take into account that fact regarding accent, regarding the way the person will be able to express. Otherwise, you won't, or you will ignore a large population, or you won't be able to understand a large population using your solution.
Thank you very much, guys. I think that there's still a lot to be said on the subject. Unfortunately, we're a bit out of time. So thank you all for coming. Please, join these guys at the coffee break afterwards if you want to explore more about inclusion on AI-based tools. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.